Andus, the beginning. Chapter 1. The jump released them into real space with a sudden, violent jolt that sent loose equipment skidding across the deck and left the hull trembling as though it had been struck violently. For a moment, the viewports showed nothing but the fading smear of the corridor they had torn through, a distortion of light and motion that clung to their vision long after the ship's systems insisted they had arrived. The stabilizers fought to regain control, humming unevenly, and the crew braced themselves against the lingering disorientation that always followed a jump gone rough. And when the distortion finally cleared, the stars returned, but the sky was wrong. A vast, shifting mass occupied one side of the view, swallowing starlight in a way that made it impossible to judge distance or scale. It was not the crisp disk of a distant world, nor the overwhelming wall of a giant looming too close. It was something in between, a planet nearly the size of the one apparently beneath it, close enough that its atmosphere filled the viewport with restless motion. The upper layers drifted and folded over one another like slow tides, their edges blurring into the darkness as if the world was breathing into space. Subtle distortions shimmered around its silhouette where magnetic forces bent the light, giving the impression of a faint, trembling halo that made the planet seem both immense and strangely alive. The crew fell silent as the view slowly settled. Even after the chaos of the jump, even with their nerves still raw and their instruments flickering from the transition, the sight held them in place. There was something in the way how the cloud bands moved, slow, deliberate, coiled with hidden violence, and it stirred a feeling none of them expected. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a sense of standing before something older and larger than anything they had ever encountered. A few of them leaned closer to the glass without realizing it, drawn in by the silent flashes of lightning deep within the atmosphere, each one illuminating the planet's vast spirals like the pulse of a sleeping giant. For a moment, the explorers felt as though they were intruding on a presence rather than observing a world. The storms, the shifting light, the sheer scale of the motion below, all of it carried a quiet authority that pressed against their thoughts. It was the kind of awe that made the mind reach for old instincts, old myths, the ones that whispered about gods in the sky and forces that shaped the world long before people learned to name them. Even the most rational among them felt it, the subtle, unsettling sense that this planet was not merely a place, but a power. Bands of deep blue and violet wrapped around its surface, twisting in broad spirals that moved with a slow but unmistakable violence. Lightning flickered inside the cloud layers, illuminating entire regions of the atmosphere in sudden, silent bursts. The storms did not rage in chaotic patterns. They churned with a heavy, deliberate force, as if the planet were turning its weather inward, folding storms into storms until the entire world seemed to pulse with its own internal tension. At times, the cloud bands tightened and released like the muscles of some vast, unseen creature, each contraction sending a ripple of turbulence across the upper atmosphere that hinted at energies far deeper than the eye could follow. The ship's instruments suddenly reacted. Magnetic interference rippled through the consoles, and the navigation systems recalculated their position again and again, struggling to stabilize in the gravitational pull of two closely bound worlds. The explorers felt a subtle pressure shift in their bodies, a reminder that they had arrived in a system with its own rules, rules they did not yet understand. A unique world, two planets even, closer to each other than physics should ever allow. Only after their eyes adjusted to the violent glow of the gas planet did they start to notice the second world below. Slightly smaller, darker, and far more textured. It turned slowly beneath them. Its surface was marked by rugged continents and a dense, layered atmosphere that shifted in heavy, uneven patterns. Broad stretches of muted color hinted at plains and highlands, while scattered reflections revealed the presence of water. Fractured lakes, narrow inland seas, and irregular coastlines that caught the faint starlight in trembling flashes. Above these surfaces, thick cloud formations clung stubbornly to the planet's curvature, their movements strained and distorted by the gravitational pull of the storming world above. They dragged and stretched as if trying to tear free, yet somehow held their shape, locked in place by the planet's own gravity. Compared to the storm-lit world above, this one looked quieter but no less dangerous, a place shaped by pressure, weather, time, and the constant tug-of-war between these two closely bound worlds. They hung together in the void like a pair of matched spheres suspended on an invisible thread, orbiting a shared center of gravity. The explorers had trained for anomalies, for hazards, for the unexpected, but definitely not for this. The scene felt too balanced, too intimate, too quietly immense to be dismissed as a simple planetary system. For a long moment, no one spoke. The ship drifted in silence, its engines idling, as if even the vessel hesitated to intrude on what it had stumbled into. When the mission commander finally found his voice, it carried the unsteady edge of someone still trying to reconcile the violence of their arrival with the impossible relative calm of the view before them. "We didn't just arrive somewhere," he said quietly. "We arrived between them." The realization hit him like a second impact. They could just as easily have torn out of the jump inside one of those worlds. The fact that they hadn't felt less like skill and more like blind, impossible luck. The call from the engine room came just as the crew were still staring at the storm-lit world above them, their awe not yet settled into anything they could name. The voice crackled through the intercom with the strained edge of someone trying to sound calm after a rough jump. The chief engineer reported that one of the primary conduits had overloaded during translation. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but it was deep, buried in the core of the drive assembly, and repairs would take days, maybe longer, depending on how stable the surrounding systems remained. They could keep the ship running, but not moving far. The captain listened without interrupting, his eyes still fixated on the two planets turning slowly outside the viewport. The violent gas world above them, with its spiraling storms and silent lightning, had already taken on a presence that pressed against their thoughts. It wasn't just a planet. It felt like something watching, something vast and indifferent, something that existed on a scale the human mind wasn't built to hold. And it was staring right back at them. He finally acknowledged the engine room, his voice steady but subdued, and closed the channel. The decision he now faced was simple in structure but heavy in consequence. Remain adrift in a system they did not understand, or commit to a landing on one of the planets in this star system. Drifting meant vulnerability. Landing meant risk. Both options carried unknowns. He turned to the science officer who had already begun running scans the moment the ship stabilized. The officer's face was lit by the shifting reflections of the gas planet, but his attention was fixed on the data streaming across his console. He reported that the system held only two major bodies within immediate reach: the storm-racked gas world above them and the smaller, darker planet below. The gas world was impossible to land on. The smaller one, though harsh and layered with thin atmosphere, showed signs of pressure and composition that could support human presence, at least temporarily. "It's not welcoming," the officer said, "but it's the only one that won't kill us outright. If we need a place to wait out repairs, that's it." Captain Doras absorbed the information in silence. The crew waited, still half caught between the lingering shock of the jump and the strange, godlike presence of the storming world above them. The decision would shape everything that followed, but in that moment, it felt less like a choice and more like the system itself was guiding them. Two worlds turning together, one violent and unreachable, the other dark and uncertain, and the ship suspended between them with nowhere else to go. He drew a long breath, the kind taken by someone who knows there is no safe choice, only the one that keeps them alive long enough to make another. He looked at the science officer, then at the crew, then at the two worlds, turning in their slow, ancient dance. "Tell me," he said quietly, "if we go down there, What are we stepping into? The science officer did not answer immediately, and Doris could see in the tightness of his jaw and the way his hands hovered just above the console that this was not a question that allowed for a clean, confident reply. It was one of those moments where every option carried weight, and every path forward demanded that someone accept a risk they could not yet fully quantify. He drew in a slow breath, eyes flicking between the data streams and the view beyond the glass, as if he needed both, the numbers and the sight of those two worlds, to shape his thoughts into something he could stand behind. From a purely scientific perspective, he began, his voice measured but not detached. Staying where we are is obviously the worst option in the long term. We're in a dynamically unstable position between two significant gravity wells with a damaged drive and limited maneuvering capacity. The system is balanced, but we are not part of that balance. Any fluctuation in the engines, any miscalculation in our station keeping, and we start to drift. If we drift toward the gas planet, we're done. If we drift toward the smaller one without control, we're at the mercy of its atmosphere and terrain. So, scientifically speaking, remaining in this exact position is only acceptable as a temporary state while we decide what to do next, not as a strategy. He shifted the display, bringing up a layered model of the smaller world's atmosphere, its pressure gradients, temperature bands, and the faint but clear signatures of water and complex weather systems. From the standpoint of planetary science, the lower world is hostile but coherent. The atmosphere is thin, but it has some structure. There are stable pressure zones, predictable circulation patterns, and regions where the conditions fall within a range we can adapt to with the equipment we have. The presence of liquid water, even in fractured basins and narrow seas, suggests a long-term climate system rather than a transient one. That means we're not dealing with a world in the middle of catastrophic change, at least not on the timescale that matters to us. If we land, we're landing on a planet that has had time to settle into itself, even if that settled state is harsh. He glanced briefly at Doris, then at the engineering readouts hovering in the corner of his display. From the engineer's perspective, he sighed, they're going to tell you that repairing a drive core in microgravity, while constantly compensating for the pull of two planets, is a nightmare. Every adjustment they make to the ship's mass distribution, every power reroute, every structural stress test becomes more complicated when the vessel is in a delicate orbital balance. On the surface, assuming we can find a stable landing zone, they get a fixed frame of reference. Gravity is constant. Orientation is constant. Thermal management is easier, because they can radiate heat into a predictable environment instead of juggling it in vacuum. They can anchor equipment, set up external rigs, even cannibalize non-essential systems without worrying that a shift in mass will alter our orbit. From a repair standpoint, a surface gives them something to push against. Out here, everything they do is a negotiation with inertia. He paused, and when he continued, his tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal without losing its precision. Professionally, my duty is to recommend the option that gives us the highest probability of survival and the greatest amount of information. Landing on the smaller world does both. It gives us a place to stabilize, to repair, to regroup, and it gives us data, real data, not just orbital scans. We learn its atmosphere, its geology, its behavior under the influence of the larger planet. We learn how it responds to us being there. That knowledge has value beyond this crisis. It's why we're out here in the first place. If we drift in orbit and hope the engines hold, we're gambling everything on systems that are already telling us they're not fine. If something else fails while we're up here, we don't get a second chance. And personally, he let his gaze drift to the storm-lit world above, where lightning continued to flicker in deep, coiled spirals that made the planet look less like a place and more like a process, something ongoing and immense. Personally, he said quietly, I won't pretend I'm not affected by that. He nodded toward the gas planet. There is something about it that makes every instinct I have want to keep our distance. It's not rational, but it's there. It feels like standing too close to a machine that doesn't know you exist and could crush you without noticing. The smaller world doesn't feel safer exactly, but it feels approachable. It's a place we can touch, measure, stand on. The storms above us are beyond anything we can meaningfully interact with. The world below is dangerous, but it's dangerous in ways we can understand. Pressure, weather, gravity, chemistry. Those are things we know how to work with, even when they're trying to kill us. He straightened slightly, as if committing himself to the conclusion he was about to voice. If we stay here, we're a damaged ship suspended between two forces that don't care whether we hold position or not. If we try to limp out of the system with what we have, we risk a failure in deep space with no fallback. If we land, we accept immediate risk in exchange for control, stability, and the chance to fix what's broken while standing on something solid. From science, from engineering, from duty, and from the part of me that has no interest in dying slowly between two indifferent worlds, my recommendation is this. We go down to the planet below. We choose our landing zone carefully. We prepare for the atmosphere to fight us every step of the way, and we give the engineers a planet under their feet instead of vacuum under their tools. He looked at Doras fully now, his well-formed opinions delivered, the options laid bare. It's not a good option, he added, but it's the only one that gives us a future that isn't just waiting for something to fail. Captain Doras remained silent for a long moment after the officer finished speaking, his gaze fixed on the two worlds, turning in their slow, gravitational dance. The bridge lights were dimmed to compensate for the glare of the storm-lit atmosphere above them, and in that half-light his face looked older, carved with the strain of command and the weight of choices that could not be undone. The hum of the damaged engines vibrated faintly through the deck, a constant reminder that time was not a luxury they possessed. He straightened, exhaled once through his nose, and turned fully toward the science officer with the expression of a man who had already made his decision but needed the numbers to justify it. "I need rotation data," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "For both planets, their alignment to the local star. I want to know where the light falls, where the shadow lies, and how long each region stays in either. If we land on the side that gives us the most stability and the least interference from that thing above us." The science officer nodded and immediately began pulling up orbital models, his fingers moving across the console with the practiced precision of someone who had spent a lifetime turning raw data into meaning. The holographic display expanded, showing the two planets locked in their tight orbital relationship, the larger one dragging the smaller through a gravitational field that twisted their atmospheres and tugged at their clouds. Lines of light traced their rotation, their tilt, their exposure to the star that burned faintly at the center of the system. The officer watched the simulation cycle through hours, then days, then weeks, until the patterns became clear. "The smaller world has a stable dayside right now," he said, adjusting the model to highlight the illuminated hemisphere. "The gas planet's pull is strongest on the night side, where the atmosphere is thinner and more easily distorted. But on the day side, the solar heating stabilizes the upper layers. The gravitational interference is still present, but significantly reduced. If we land there, we avoid the worst of the tidal forces." He expanded the atmospheric readouts further, letting a new band of data slide into view, its numbers shifting in soft amber tones. "Oxygen levels are low," he continued, "lower than what we'd consider comfortable or healthy for long exposure, but still within the range the human body can tolerate without assistance. You'll feel it, shorter breaths, quicker fatigue, but you won't suffocate. It's thin, but it's breathable, and that alone makes this hemisphere the safest place we're likely to find in this system." Doras nodded slowly, absorbing the information. The day side, light, warmth, stability, and survivable. a place where the engineers could work without fighting the constant drag of the gas planet's gravity, a place where the crew could breathe. If not comfortably, then at least without the immediate threat of atmospheric collapse. He looked again at the smaller world, its fractured seas glinting faintly, its clouds stretched and strained but still holding their shape. "Then that's where we go," he said quietly. "We land on the sunlit side." He hesitated just for a heartbeat, as though something inside him needed to catch up with the words he was about to speak. When he continued, his voice carried a different weight, something personal, something he had kept buried beneath the layers of command and protocol. "We give it a name," he said. "If we're going to trust our lives to that world, it deserves more than a designation on a chart." The crew turned toward him, surprised by the shift in tone. Dorez kept his eyes on the planet below, the one that would soon hold them, shelter them, test them. "Zoran," he said, "after my daughter." The name hung in the air like a soft echo, unexpected and intimate. Some of the crew exchanged glances, not out of judgment but out of the quiet understanding that comes when a commander reveals the smallest crack in the armor he wears every day. Dorez did not elaborate. He did not need to. The name carried its own gravity, its own history, its own ache. The science officer cleared his throat gently, not to interrupt but to acknowledge the moment before moving forward. "And the larger one?" he asked, glancing toward the storm-lit world above, its spiraling clouds illuminated by silent lightning. Dorez looked up at it, the violent, coiled presence that had greeted them the moment they emerged from the jump. It felt ancient, indifferent, immense, something that existed beyond human comprehension, a force rather than a place. "Andas," he said. "Let that one be Andas." The names settled onto the bridge like the first stones of a new foundation, marking the beginning of something none of them could yet define. Zoran below, waiting with its fractured seas and strained clouds. Andas above, pulsing with storms that lit its atmosphere from within. Two worlds, bound together, were now bound to them.